All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started with our session today. I really appreciate folks joining us in person and online for our session on stress management. My name is Jesse Singleton. I am the Assistant Director for Student Support with UTEP's Graduate School. And I'm excited to chat with you a bit today and hopefully provide some useful skills you can apply in your lives and help you be more productive and happier graduate students. I'm joined by a couple of colleagues that will help us out today. Also in the room joining me in the in-person space is Angel Diaz, who is our coordinator for student success and fellowships. And in the online space, our doctoral assistant, Elizabeth Biney, who is our digital assistant here. And so if you have questions, if there's something wrong with technology, something's not working out, let us know, and Elizabeth will help me navigate that so I make sure that I'm taking care of the folks in the digital space well in our session. But yeah, we'll get right into it, talking about stress management, which I think is a really important session for us to facilitate. We haven't actually done it since, I think, spring 2022. And so I'm glad to bring this back and chat with you all a bit about this. Now, where we start in talking about stress management, we're actually going to talk about the biology of stress and how it impacts us first, and then talk a bit about defining stress. And then we'll move into more practical strategies that you can apply to help you be more effective at managing, mitigating stress, being productive with stress. So if you're not a science person, you may not be as excited about this next portion, but I think it's important to help us understand physically what's happening to us when we experience stress moments. So we'll start there. So what is stress really for us? It's actually our automatic response to any physical, mental, or emotional reaction or demand or something we deem as a threat, right? And so the different stressors in our life to varying degrees have this physical impact on our body, where we experience high amounts of stress. It releases various chemicals such as cortisol and adrenaline into our system, into our bloodstream, and that in turn impacts how our body is interacting in those given moments, right? It's really what we see as our flight, fight, or freeze body response, right? You know, most folks are really familiar with the fight or flight. Not as many folks are familiar with the freeze side of things, but they really are different responses we may have based on how your body is perceiving the situation and essentially what it feels it is going to be successful, right? And so when you have the fight response, it enables you to react quickly to a threatening situation, to supply protection by making sure you're ready to act. And so essentially it's that getting ready to push back mentality, right? The flight is essentially when your body assumes that it can't win in a situation. And so the best situation is to remove yourself. And so it enables you to remove yourself from harm's way. And through release of adrenaline, you can move past your normal physical limits, run for longer periods of time, move past exhaustion to get yourself out of harm's way, right? And then the freeze is the stress response when your body feels that there isn't a path towards fighting your way out of a situation or running from a situation. Essentially, your body will feel stuck in place. And so it's really good to understand all three of these and how they may impact us. Because a lot of times we think about the fight or flight and the freeze in a life-threatening situation, right? Let's say we're in a situation where a fire is in our building, right? And we have to move to action, right? Our body will put the adrenaline into our system and help us move past that, hopefully out and away from the situation. But our body doesn't have a great way of differentiating between just high stress moments and life-threatening moments, right? And so this is where it can cause us some difficulty, where we are experiencing high amounts of stress from the work that we're doing, the deadlines we have pushing on us, conversation we need to have or in the middle of having with someone, our relationships are causing these stressors on us that are pushing our body into this fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? And they're meant to be short-term types of responses, right? Long-term, so if we're at this fight or flight for a long period of time, we're pushing our body and it can have negative impacts. If you also think about some of the terms of when we are experiencing high stress, Let's say we are working on a project, there is a deadline looming, we know we have other projects that are coming up, we have some family obligations that are going on, so we're experiencing high levels of stress, but we can't fight that, and we can't run from that. And we may feel like we're stuck in place and we're freezing. We start to understand why this may be difficult for us in managing stress, as our body is pumping chemicals into our bloodstream that's telling us to fight or flight, or maybe even freeze. But really what we need to do is tackle a to-do list. And so understanding how this happens, it can be really helpful for us to understand how we move past or make productive use of the stress in our lives. So a couple of things that we see in the stress response, right? So we got to put our body under stress. Our brain, essentially through our pituitary gland, creates these hormones, the cortisol and the adrenaline, that enters our bloodstream. Then there's a couple of things that it does for us or to us. It allows our liver to convert glycogen to glucose, blood sugar. It actually increases our blood pressure, increases our sweating. We start breathing faster. We get an accelerated heart rate. We can experience tunnel vision, and our digestion slows down, right? These are the physical processes when we have that fight, flight, freeze dynamic. Which again, if we think about in a life-threatening situation, we are familiar with this. But when we think about our everyday stressors, where we feel like we're overstressed, overworked, we may not be recognizing these stress responses and how they're negatively impacting us, right? You may have instances where you have a lot to do, you're very stressed out, and you realize you haven't eaten all day, right? You reach the end of the day and you realize you haven't been hungry all day because your body's been pushing these hormones into your bloodstream as a result of your stress, and it's slowed down your digestion. You've been distracted. And that's not necessarily going to be healthy for you and not going to help you be successful throughout the day. So recognizing when that's happening and how we address it is important, right? Thinking about those times where you have that elevated heart rate while you're under a difficult situation and why that may be happening. It's related to these stress responses. And so while this isn't kind of like the sciencey side of things, I think it is helpful as we start our session to really be thinking about how this impacts us and what physical symptoms we may be feeling when we go into our stress response, and how some can be really positive for us and some can be non-productive. So that's the sciencey side of things. And again, as we go through, please feel free, put any questions you have in the chat or come off mute, ask questions as we go through. If I'm not being clear on something, if you'd like me to elaborate or you have a question about something, please let me know. I definitely don't mind interruptions as we go through. So that is kind of like the physical manifestation, but we all probably understand that at least in some degree. What actually causes the stress, though? And identifying that can be really important for helping us understand how we move through to positive uses of stress, right? So you have this example here of the "this is fine" meme of a high stress situation. Probably we describe it as a freeze response, right? Surrounded by fire, rather than running or fighting, he's freezing in place, right? And that's what we want to avoid, is that sense of being stuck. So there are a couple of main causes for stress. The work that we do can indelibly just cause stress in our lives. Work in general, for most professions, is going to have some element of stress. There's some element of a deadline, interpersonal coworker relationships, pressure on ourselves to do well in the work that we do and want to excel. Pretty much every position, every job is going to have some element of stress to it. I would argue even someone that is self-employed as a painter, painting portraits and things like that, is still going to experience, even when I think of that as a very low stress environment of painting scenery. If you're Bob Ross, although he has passed on, there's still, I'm sure, stress in Bob Ross's life, or was, in doing what he was doing, even if it was about imparting kind of those messages to people, right? And so work indelibly is going to have that element of stress to it, right? Money is something that's going to cause stress in lives as we make sure that we can balance our budgets, have enough to meet our obligations, make sure we have enough to manage any unexpected circumstances that may pop up, particularly for our students, knowing that you're working towards degrees. And so it's difficult to be fully employed in the way that you want to be, or at the career point that you want to be. You're making ends meet. Money can be a consistent stressor for us in the back of our mind. The relationships that we have with our family, our friends, our peers, can definitely be a stress point. Even when there are positive relationships, the management and upkeep of relationships can cause stress. I'm sure folks have had those moments where you're realizing that you're not connecting with folks as often as you would like. And that has that feeling of guilt of, I haven't called mom in a while. And how those relationships can cause some stress, right? And so just the upkeep of, even when they're not going negatively, can cause us stress. Irritants in our life can cause stress. Those can be major things, or it can be minor things like, your jacket catching on a doorknob when you're already in a bad mood, and that kind of increasing your stress level as things just kind of seem to pile up, right? And so major and minor irritants can cause stress. Life changes can be big causers of stress. Moving into a new program, changing a major, moving to a new location, changing careers, any life changes can be causes of stress. And then I say this one for last, our self-generated causes of stress, right? Our internal monologues, how we talk about ourselves when we're talking to ourselves, right? How we perceive the progress we're making versus those of others, and how we treat ourselves in those moments, right? We can have those self-generated elements of stress. Also, maybe poor management of our timelines for that week and putting ourselves more in a stressful environment because, we didn't manage our deadlines the way we know we can be self-generated stress. Things that are entirely within our control. So those are the main causes of stress. Some examples that we can see for that, obviously, our schoolwork, y'all are students. That is going to cause some stress for you at some point. For some folks, more stress, some folks less stress, but that's okay. The work that we do, as we talked about, causes stress. Our family, depending on what's going on in our family, can cause stress, and that can be the relationship side of things, or it can be, maybe a family member is ill, and we're taking care of them, right? I was talking with my colleague about family and kids, and we both have kids, and when they're sick, that's hard. That's rough. It causes stress if you're worried about them and worried that you're going to get sick, because kids invariably will sneeze directly into your eyeball and get you sick. So you have those moments where family can cause you some stress. Our relationships, as we talked about, legal matters can cause us stress, right? If we involved in a court process for any reason, that's going to cause some stress for us. Finances and the upkeep of loss is an interesting one. And that can be something that's either perceived or an actual loss, right? And so we think about perceived loss, we think about like missing out on opportunities, right? Or feeling like we are doing less than others, right? And so there's that sense of loss that comes with that. That's a perception and how we're perceiving it. Or actual loss, right? When we lose someone or something that's important to us will cause stress. Mental health concerns can be big stressors. And that can be particularly true when it's an unmanaged mental health concern, right? We aren't actively seeking or getting the treatment that we need or the support that we need for a mental health concern. But definitely folks that are experiencing mental health concerns that they're even working through, maybe they're receiving the support for, is still a stressor for us, right? Our physical environment can be a major stressor, depending on your personal preference. I know for me, I get stressed out when, my space isn't really tidy, but I also am a person that tends to make my space untidy by kind of piling things, right? And so I'll have those moments where suddenly I look around and realize I'm not in a tidy environment. I'm more stressed than I should be because I haven't cleaned up around me, and I have to have that moment to make sure everything is clean and put away, right? One of my big things to help me work through my stress in my physical situation with my home life is that, and I got 3 kids at home, their toys are always all over the house. That's going to happen. I accept that. My boundary is my kitchen is always clean when I go to bed. I go through, I do the dishes, I put everything away, wipe down the countertops. I feel good about my physical space, even if I know that the living room's got Legos all over the floor, right? So our physical environment can cause some stress for us. And our living situation, right? And how we navigate that. That can be something that causes stress. Last one is our current events, right? Now, I won't take a stand on any of the current events that are happening in our world, but I think we can all reasonably agree that we live in a stressful environment related to our current events. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of divisive opinions about the things that are happening in our world. And so sometimes just engaging in those conversations consuming the media related to it, and the news can be a stressor for us as we have different thoughts and feelings about what's happening in our world today. And we have to find a way to do something with all of that, right? And so what causes our stress? Well, the reality is there's a lot of things. And on a given day, it can be any of these factors or all of them pushing in on us. And if we don't find a good way to manage that in some way, diffuse that stress, use it productively in some way, it can be overwhelming for us, right? If you think about all these stressors we talked about and the conversation about the biological processes that stress puts us under, you think about all the ways that roles we experience stress, we can see why our body may consistently be putting adrenaline and cortisol into our bloodstream as we're experiencing these different things, and that wears us down. And we get less able to cope with and manage the things that we do, right? And as we get piled on with all of that, it gets harder and harder to dig ourselves out. And so understanding all of this at a basic level and then looking for ways to strategies to address it that work for us is really key. I do want to say, though, that not all stress is negative. And I think in some ways we intrinsically understand this, but it's good to kind of call this out and understand that stress is normal, right? It's part of our lives. Things are going to be stressful. And there are certain elements where stress is helpful to us to help us be more productive, right? We call that eustress, or positive stress. It's short-term stress that moves us to action in a positive way, right? Ways that you may feel challenged, but the stress is an opportunity that's meaningful to us, right? Think of this as, maybe you feel stress about a project you're taking on, but it's one that you're excited about working on. And you feel a strong sense of gratification and satisfaction when you complete it and you see it done well, right? The process of going through that project is going to be stressful in some way, but it motivates you, right? That eustress is motivation, it's challenge, it energizes us, and it helps us meet our responsibilities and our goals, right? I would say in general, taking part in graduate education, because we're here as students, hopefully a lot of that is in the optimal performance eustress environment of you feel challenged but motivated, right? You have goals and responsibilities that you're moving towards and you're completing, right? You're using that well. You're finding your ways to also be calm and disengage from that stress, but you're positively utilizing that eustress to get what you need done, right? Moving this into a really practical example, right? You think about the world of sports, right? When an athlete steps out on to take part in whatever given sport they're taking part in, there's going to be an element of stress that they're engaging in, right? That they have to manage and find a way to put that into practice. And when they do that effectively, that stress allows them to be more effective at their given sport, right? But if they allow it to overwhelm them, less effective. So we think about moving back in classroom, how do we use that eustress? What we want to really avoid or help manage is the obstructive stress, the stuff that keeps you from achieving your goals, completing your responsibilities, makes you feel less motivated. And so rather than feeling challenged, you feel overwhelmed, or what you're doing is unfair, right? It's not a challenge, it's just it's something that it's unrealistic for me to be able to do, right? And so this is the distress. It can be short-term, as in really acute, or it can be long-term, chronic stress, right? We have those moments where, something's a really acute stress point. We're sitting at our desk, all of a sudden we feel almost like we're hyperventilating, our heart's beating really fast, and we can't concentrate on which project or which task we need to do in that moment, right? We have 3 or 4 things to do, and rather than do one of them, we're panicking about doing all 4 at once, right? That's distress. It's obstructive. It's not allowing you to be successful. Or that chronic long-term stress, that slow burn where you always have this feeling kind of in the back of your mind that you're being drugged down, and you know that you're being less productive day to day because the stress is pulling you down, right? Can have that continuous feeling of kind of being overwhelmed, exhausted, or just burned out with your responsibilities, what we're doing. It can have an all-encompassing sense of being imposed upon, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel, right? There's just more piling on and never going to get out from underneath it. This type of stress inhibits your action. It negatively impacts your physical and your emotional health. It's not going to help you achieve those goals, right? And so our focus is trying to move us from this distress into the eustress or the calm side of this kind of graph we have here, right? Knowing that there are times where we need to be at stress and times we need to be calm. And we want to spend as much time as possible out of the distress moments. While also recognizing that it happens and we shouldn't beat ourselves up when we have those high stress moments, right? That just adds to the stress if we beat ourselves up about it, not being able to manage it well, right? We got to take a step back, recognize it, and address it. So ways to recognize if we're in that distress moment versus the eustress. And again, sometimes folks are really good at recognizing when they're overstressed, and sometimes folks are not. I've definitely interacted with folks in the professional world that they're operating at an almost consistent level of distress, but they see it as high functioning productivity. Those are also the folks that I recognize are no longer in the field with me because they left, because they didn't feel like they were being cared for in the field. And I think that can definitely happen, but also they weren't being good stewards of themselves, of recognizing when they're in distress and pulling back and managing that, right? And so examples of where you might be in distress, if you're eating or sleeping too much or too little, right? And that's a pattern that really depends on you, what's in character for you individually, right? If you normally function on 5 to 6 hours of sleep, that is your circadian rhythm, and you recognize you're now getting 10 hours of sleep, and you always still feel tired, that could be an element of stress, right? Versus I normally get my 8 hours. Now I'm only sleeping for 6 because I can't seem to stay asleep, right? I normally get up at 6 a.m. and now I keep consistently getting up at 5:15 before my alarm goes off. I can't get back to sleep, right? It's out of character for you. So finding those patterns, right? And then recognize, like, whether you're eating too much, too little. Example I use is early in my career as a professional, I recognized that at one point, most of the meals that I ate were in bar form. I got up in the morning and I didn't have time to eat a breakfast. And so I ate a Belvita breakfast biscuit. And then I didn't have time to eat lunch. I was always on the go. And so I got an energy drink and a power bar and ate that. And I didn't eat any real food until the evening, right? And at one point I stepped back and realized what I was doing to my body and how negative that was for me. And then I needed to stop. I needed to make sure I ate good meals. And that helped me reduce my stress and feeling like I was overwhelmed at work, right? Other examples of distress is not wanting to be around your support network, right? Your friends, family, your peers, those folks that you confide in. Finding that you're not wanting to engage in those conversations is an example of distress. Having really low or no energy, again, it can come from your body being constantly under this stress response and feeling like you're being piled upon. Unexplained aches or pains, like a constant stomach ache or lots of headaches, can be examples of where distress is impacting you. Any feelings of hopelessness or helplessness. And if you have those feelings, please make sure you talk with someone you trust and share those feelings and talk about that. I do put on there, we have in the bottom corner here, the Miners Talk After Hours Crisis Line. If you don't have this number in your phone, please put it in your phone today. Whether that's when you need that conversation with someone or a friend or a peer needs it, everyone should have this number in their phone. This number, I'll take a minute to just chat about it before we go through the rest of the list, is staffed by the clinicians in our Counseling and Psychological Resource Center, and it's staffed 24/7. During the day, that number goes right to CAPS. At night, it's the After Hours Crisis Line. And so that number is the number for CAPS 24/7. It just depends on where it routes. And it's a great way to make sure you're getting in contact about any concerns that you have, right? And so if you have feelings of helplessness or hopelessness, you should talk with someone. And that's a great resource you have. If you have excessive smoking, drinking, or any drug use, that includes prescription medications, overuse of those, examples of distress. Constant or consistent worrying or feelings of dread, right? You can't seem to shake the feeling something bad is happening, or you can't stop worrying about a project and disengage from it. Unfounded feelings of guilt without an identifiable source, right? You just feel bad. The vibes are off. Borrow some language from our young people today, right? If you were thinking about hurting yourself or others. And again, if you have that, please talk with someone, talk with a friend, talk with a loved one, reach out to the crisis line, get some help and support. Don't carry that with you and wait for it to become overwhelming, right? And then experiencing difficulty just adjusting to home or work life, right? And the movement between the two, right? These are symptoms of distress. Again, some of them are a bit more obvious than others, right? And if we step back from them and think of them objectively, right, they're pretty easy to recognize. What's hard is recognizing these in ourselves, right? We're in a workshop setting with Jesse, and we can look at this, objectively and clinically and recognize all these things. Sitting down and reflecting and thinking about your own environment is much harder, right? And acknowledging that, I think, is very important. A lot of times we'll talk about subjects and it's like, yeah, that seems really basic, but how we apply it in experiencing our own lives is the difficult part. And so I encourage you to sit back, reflect, and think about this after our session today of like, where am I at? What am I experiencing, right? Am I taking some of these symptoms of distress and pushing them off because I don't want to seem weak to others around me, right? Or I don't want to admit that I'm under high periods of stress. Is there something that I'm ignoring that is a warning sign that shows I need to take action, right? So think about that. Or do you see that in others? And are you helping them as best you can for your friends, family, peers, helping them navigate that? Which again, I think it's important to be your own advocate and be a support network for others. So we talked about the biology of stress and what it is. We talked about positive stress and recognizing we're in de-stress. And now we're going to get into kind of the meat and the potatoes of the session of what do we do about all this, right? I imagine if you are attending the stress management workshop, you have some understanding that you're experiencing stress and you want to get better at it, right? And so what we're here for today is what are we doing to fix it? Now, what I will tell you is the strategies I'm going to give you today are not rocket science, right? There are things you're probably going to recognize. You may have heard at some point. Again, this information is not a magic bullet. It's not anything I would say is groundbreaking, but putting it into practice for ourselves is what's difficult, where the work comes in. So as you're going through these, kind of evaluate, are there ways that you're utilizing these things now that can help you? The first one is just eliminate the stress where you can, right? Really easy to say, really hard to do. So one of the first things you can learn to help benefit you as a professional is learning how and when to say no, right? You can't say yes to every opportunity or every assignment, everything that comes your way, right? If it's optional, really considering, should I take that opportunity? So learning how to say no and being willing to say no more often, right? This is one where I've been working at it for 15 years and I'm still only moderately successful at it, right? A lot of times something will come by as an opportunity in our office. And if nobody takes on the responsibility, I have a hard time not taking up that responsibility to make sure that it happens. But I've gotten better at that and recognizing where I have to apply my time when I'm overworked. So you have to find ways to make sure we are paring down our own to-do list by not taking on more things that we don't need to. Learn when to say no. Avoid or minimize your interaction with people who stress you out, right? Sometimes we can just completely remove someone from our lives that stresses us out. They're toxic. I don't need to be around them. I'm not going to engage with them. That's okay, right? Say you have a classmate that you just seem to not get along with. It's oil and water. The gears grind whenever you're working with that individual. You can avoid being in a group project with that one person potentially, right? And avoid the stress, right? So the other side of the classroom, figure that out. But you also may not be able to completely avoid those situations. You have to just minimize those interactions, right? If you have a coworker that you struggle with, you can't just cut that person off. But how do you minimize the interactions so that you both are okay, right? Or build the relationship better. That works too. I'm an advocate of building relationships, right? But I do think it's important to think about that not everyone's worth your time, and that's okay, because they got to meet you halfway. And if they're not, how do you avoid or minimize that interaction so they don't stress you out? Practicing good time management, right? Easy to say, hard to do. We got a whole session on time management. I've got a recording online, and we'll do the session later on this semester. I encourage you to check that out. But practicing good time management will help alleviate some stress automatically. Other things that you can do is just accepting that there are things that you cannot control, right? And for our high achieving folks, our folks that want to be in charge, our leaders, it's hard to accept this, but there are things that we just can't control. An example is someone else's behavior, right? They're going to do what they're going to do. And if we allow someone else's behavior to stress us out, we're just taking on their behaviors as stressors. So acknowledging that that's beyond our control, and that we can provide encouragement, advice, guidance, direction. They're going to do what they're going to do, and that's not our stress to own, is important, right? I saw a kind of a funny meme a while back where it says, when I say no worries, what I mean is no worries for you. All your worries are mine now. They belong to me, right? And I identify with that very heavily, right? But I think it relates to this, like there are things beyond your control, right? So when somebody does something and you're like, no worries, you can't keep worrying about it. You got to mean that, right? Don't take on their negative behaviors as your stressors. Focus on what you can control and how you react to the problem. How are you moving through that? So focus on you. And expend your energy where it can be effective, right? If you have, been working with someone and they're just not adhering to the guidance, right? Is that the place to spend your time, right? 80-20 rule. 80% of our time is taken up by 20% of individuals who are usually just not doing what they need to do, right? So expend your energy where you can. Again, my guidance isn't just to write people off. I always am in favor of building bridges and mentorship. But again, people have to meet you halfway at least. And so think about how that works and impacts your life. Think positively. And again, this can be hard to do. But negative thoughts lead to negative behaviors and negative coping mechanisms, right? If your internal self-talk is consistently negative and your outlook is consistently negative, you will turn more to negative behaviors and negative coping mechanisms. And it's not going to pull you out of the stressors you're in, right? Whereas a positive outlook offsets the difficult situations, right? If you can acknowledge something is hard, it's difficult, it's stressful, but you have a positive outlook on it, you're able to move forward much more effectively. Do what you can to make an effort to learn from mistakes and see them as challenges for personal growth, right? When a mistake happens, it's just a stop on the path towards success, to doing it correctly, to achieving a goal. We're human beings, mistakes are going to happen. Some are big mistakes, some are small mistakes, but how do we move past that? And there's very few things we can't come back from, right? And so acknowledging that. Reflect on the things that you appreciate in your life. Take those moments, including yourself, not just things exterior to you, right? We have a tendency to focus on the things we don't like about ourselves, the negative performances. Celebrate the positives for yourself, celebrate the successes, and the things in your life that you are happy with. And again, I strongly encourage the use of positive self-talk on a regular basis. I've had this conversation with folks a lot, particularly when they're talking about their test anxiety and experience around like finals week and things like that. Research shows us that the most effective thing a student can do outside of studying and knowing the material is engaging in positive self-talk before an exam. Telling yourself, I know the material, I've studied, I can handle this, I'm going to do well, has a tangible impact on someone's performance. It also has a tangible impact on how we view ourselves and how we manage stress. If you're constantly berating yourself internally, that's going to wear you down. So talk about yourself in a positive lens internally. Can't stress this enough. Make sure you seek support. Do not be on an island by yourself. Confide in your family, your friends, your trusted peers. Build that network. It doesn't have to be a gigantic network either. For our folks that value the few close personal relationships, that is entirely okay. Lean into those and use that support network, right? But you have to have some kind of a support network. Know that seeking professional support is normal and it is healthy. And I strongly advise and encourage folks to find some way to seek that professional support. The way I had this described to me that has always stuck with me is kind of thinking about this as lens of, going to the doctor, right? You don't only want to go and see a doctor when you are hurt or ill, right? You don't just go to the doctor when you break your leg. If you're taking care of yourself, you should go and get a yearly regular checkup, right? And that's everyone, no one typically argues that, right? We all mostly agree with that. We don't see mental health in the same way. Oftentimes, we only see mental health as something that we're going to engage with when we're on fire, right? I'm in crisis and I need to talk to someone. Realistically, you should treat your mental health like you do your physical health. Go get regular checkups. Talk with someone. Now, the wonderful thing is on our campus, as students, you have access to, at no cost to you, mental health care resources. And that won't always be the case. And so I encourage you to use those resources now while you have them and develop those positive behaviors so you can carry those forward. But again, it's normal, it's healthy, and it's encouraged. Then find an outlet to express your feelings rather than bottling things up, right? Whatever that's going to be for you, find that outlet. Some practical things that you can do, add relaxation techniques to your daily routine. They just overall help promote your positive health, give you a chance to clear your head. And they don't really have to be something you're spending a huge amount of time on, right? It doesn't have to be an hour or 2 hours or even 30 minutes of something or something you dedicate time to. It can be 5 minutes, right? And we can have those moments where instead of taking a break by scrolling through our phone, we engage in a 5-minute deep breathing exercise or a self-guided meditation. Even really quick yoga in the office, right? Stash a yoga mat in your desk and you got 5 minutes, do a couple of poses, get back to work if that's what you like doing. Find a way to make it fit in with what you do. If you're looking for some examples on some things you could add to your routine very easily, CAPS, our Counseling and Psychological Center, has what's called CAPS to Go. I had a QR code there right there on the screen that'll take you to it, or you can just search CAPS in the My UTEP page, and CAPS to Go will be the first link you see. They have a whole listing of use on your own resources, videos, articles, things like that. And so if you're looking for a 5-minute deep breathing exercise, it's right there. And again, it's available to you. So I encourage you to check some of those things out. And so just add this into your regular routine, right? And when I say add it into your regular routine, I don't mean when you are experiencing high amounts of stress, try to implement this. Like, do it if you got to, right? But it should be what you do when you're just having your daily routine so that it becomes part of what you do and it manages the stress before you enter the distress moment, right? Do a 5-minute breathing exercise when you're in distress. Absolutely. Don't wait till you're in distress to do it. Start today. Work on improving your diet and exercise. Again, this can be easier said than done, right? But finding ways to have a well-balanced diet it can be really helpful for folks. And sometimes we're just really busy and we have to have fast food. Don't beat yourself up about that. That's okay. As I use my example, I found at one point, everything I was eating was prepackaged bar form food. And I recognized that was really unhealthy. And so I just stepped back from that and find a way to have healthier lunches, right? So find ways to even make small changes, recognize what you're doing, but try to do a well-balanced diet. That ensures your body is better prepared to fight stress. If you're in better physical health, you're going to manage the stress response better. Exercise relaxes your body and your mind while improving your overall mood. And it doesn't have to be, incredibly strenuous. It can be taking a quick walk after lunch, a morning stroll, evening stroll, things like that, some light stretching, any number of minor or mild exercises is going to have a benefit for you, right? It doesn't have to be ultra intense, buckets of sweat in what you're doing, right? You also may find that you really like that, and that's what you do. Like, I like hitting the treadmill for 30 minutes, and the last 10 minutes, I'm really ratcheting it up because I want to really know that I did something when I left. That's good too, but it doesn't have to be that. And sometimes that's the thing that's intimidating for folks in starting exercises. They feel like you have to be at a really high level to exercise, and you don't. Any physical activity is going to help, right? Exercise really has been shown it prevents and reduces the effects of stress. And so I strongly encourage it. Actively practice self-care, which gets talked about a lot, but doesn't often get defined really well. The door. Sorry, we'll get back into it. And so ways that you can do that, there's a lot of definitions and ways you can practice self-care. Asking for and seeking help is self-care. Spending time alone when you need it is self-care, right? Acknowledging sometimes you need that, right? Putting yourself first and giving yourself permission to do that, is important. Affix your mask before your neighbor, on an airplane. Put yourself first. Asking for what you need, right? Setting good boundaries. Staying at home when you need to. Saying no. Forgiving yourself, right? We mess up. We don't do the thing we want to do. Don't keep beating yourself up about it. Forgive yourself. And taking a step back. All of those are examples of practical, emotional self-care, right? Some things that you can do to really put that into practice. Really simple things. 5-minute apps. Make your bed. We talked about your physical space and how that impacts you, right? Just the act of making your bed, setting that up, can be really helpful for folks. Make sure you're drinking water. Helps all our body processes. Light a candle if you're in an environment that's safe enough that you can do that, right? Eat a snack, preferably a healthy one, but have a snack. If you feel like you're under high stress, blood sugar might be low, take a minute, eat a snack. Go back to what you're doing. Make plans with folks to spend time with them, right? Listen to music. Find the things that get us in the zone of where we want to be. Declutter. If our environment is kind of piling up around us, declutter, right? Take a minute to watch YouTube. Just disengage, do something completely different. Not every moment of your day has to be productive. That's all right. Allow yourself those times. Do some doodling, right? Or write affirmations in your journal. All of those things, 5-minute things that can help you lead to self-care and help you improve your mood and your stress and help lower your stress levels, right? Also, make sure you're getting a good night's rest. We need a certain amount of sleep to be functional people, depending on your circadian rhythm and your own body processes. Some folks need more, some folks need less. But make sure you're getting a good amount of rest that's working for you, right? It's important because it gives your body that time to recover and move on from the daily stresses. And so if we're not sleeping enough, again, it's just building and building and building. You have that time to get that through, right? And do not substitute caffeine for good sleep, right? By all means, enjoy your morning coffee. I gotta have my morning coffee as well. I need it, makes me feel good, but it's not a substitute for sleep, right? And you may have that, I just need to pick me up, right? I'm feeling tired, lethargic in the middle of the day, cup of coffee, that's okay. But don't sleep 2 hours a day and then just drink a lot of caffeine and think that that's going to get you through. That'll just make you jittery. It actually increase the stress responses, right? So don't supplement or don't replace sleep with caffeines or supplements. And then you can also practice mindfulness. The way this is kind of structured is thinking about mindfulness, more of kind of almost a meditation type of process, right? But mindfulness is really just the ability to be fully present and not overly reactive to your surroundings, right? You're actually pushing back against that fight or flight. So when you have the stress responses, your body doesn't go into fight mode or flight mode, right? You're observing what's going on and you can react appropriately to it. It's developing this awareness of your internal states. How are you feeling physically and mentally? And avoiding the destructive or automatic habits you may have developed. The negative coping mechanisms that are not helping you manage that stress and lead a healthier life, right? So it's about learning to observe your own thoughts, emotions, circumstances, and not rushing to a judgment or an action, right? Making sure it's an appropriate action. You can do that through meditation, although the next slide we're going to talk actually about other things to do if you don't enjoy meditating, and that's okay. But we have some kind of steps here in the graphic. If you want to practice meditation, a great way to do this is to find a self-guided meditation on YouTube. Again, those videos will be really helpful if that's what you like doing. But just kind of take a seat, needs to be in a calm space, it's quiet. Decide how long you're going to do it for. Set yourself a little bit of a time limit and some kind of a timer or some way to notify you. And then you're really just kind of sitting down and noticing and paying attention to yourself, your body, right? Feeling your breath go in and out. Really focusing on that. And your mind's going to wander, and that's okay. Noticing when that happens, and then refocusing your thoughts back to noticing your breathing and what's going on in your body. And not, again, engaging in negative self-talk while that's happening, right? That's the process of mindfulness and a little bit of self-meditation that'll help you potentially get centered. A lot of great videos out there for that. I encourage you to check that out on YouTube if that's where you like to be. Although I'll be really honest, for some folks, that mindfulness and the meditation piece is not effective. It's actually been shown that it's not effective for folks who have chronic stress or high anxiety, right? Because we tend to get anxious about being mindful. And for me, that's what happens. Whenever we have one of those videos where they tell you like, unclench your jaw, unclench your shoulders, relax your feet. And all I can think of is, how do I relax my feet? I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to make my feet relax. And so I get anxiety from listening to those self-guided meditations. And that's okay. I just recognize that that's not for me. And so I got some tips on that too, right? So alternative methods. If you don't like meditation, it's not for you. You do what's called the distraction method. And I found this to be really effective. I actually started doing this before I knew what it was about, and kind of found my way to it naturally and did some reading on it after the fact, right? But basically, it's doing really basic activities that help you step back from the situations that are causing you stress and anxiety, and you see things much more objectively, right? And I can remember this happening for me very clearly early in my career. I was under really high stress, and a part on the steering or the kind of the wheel of my vehicle broke. And I didn't really have much tools or anything to fix it because I was living in an apartment complex and stuff like that. Didn't have access to my tools back home when I was growing up and stuff like that. And so I had to fix the tie rod on this vehicle with very few hand tools. And I had to really engross myself in figuring out a way to do that with the resources that I had. And it allowed me to really disengage from all the other stressors I was having in my work life and focus in on a very tangible, practical task. That when I finished, I had a high sense of gratification. Hey, I got that done. But I felt a million times better just in general from doing it, right? And I noticed I went back in the next day and the day after, less stressed and more productive in my work. And I've applied that ever since, of finding tasks that engage my brain in a different way than what's stressing me out. And so there's a lot of ways you can do this. You have to find what works for you. A lot of folks engage in arts and crafts. Coloring for mindfulness is very popular. You see this a lot when we do like stress-related events, things like stress-free events. You know, the detail-oriented, fine coloring and stuff like that. Pottery, if you have the resources for it, can be really effective. Some folks like knitting. It gets their hands moving. Again, you're focusing your brain in a different way. Those are all examples of what you could do. Yoga can be seen as working in the distraction method. It can also be seen as meditation, depending on how you're practicing it, right? And I'm not an expert in yoga, and so I don't dig deep into that, but it can be seen as both. And so it might be something, again, you're more physically active and focusing on your body movements, right? And so that can be effective. Just taking a walk and observing what's around you can be the distraction method. Singing, humming, whistling, kind of engaging your brain. Free writing with a pen and paper, not typing, can work really effective for that. Typing, again, we relate to a little bit too much work. The work we're doing and staring at a screen, getting out a notebook and journaling, free writing will engage yourself differently. Cooking, great habit. And again, a great way to connect with the healthy diet and the well-balanced diet stuff is engaging with cooking. Again, you're doing something a bit different. Putting together a puzzle, great example. The tinkering projects, that's mine, right? That's what I talked about. Finding something I'm doing that I'm kind of solving a problem, and I'm tinkering with something. I'm doing something physically using the dexterity of my hands and stuff like that, and just tackling a problem differently. That's what for me really helps with stress relief. And then a similar one is actually the one my partner practices a lot, gardening, right? And that can be outdoors or indoors, right? We have a lot of cactus in my house, mostly because that is what my partner has found to be really helpful with de-stressing, is growing cactus. But then we got really successful at it, and now we have way too many cactuses. We have to keep cutting them back and replanting them, and there's a ton of them now. But that's kind of what has worked, right? And so you find those things that help distract you from or move you out of that stress environment, and then you can go back in objectively and you can work to tackle the issue you're experiencing, right? And so if you're not all about meditation, that's okay. My recommendation is to try this other method. Look here, we're doing on time. We're okay. I do want to take a note, though, as we talked about strategies, I want to talk about balance as we're getting towards the end of our session here today. We hear a lot about finding balance, work-life balance, and stuff like that. I'll be really honest. I feel like sometimes that can really put us in a negative headspace and it's not productive, right? First off, because it's a bit of a misnomer. The idea that we're gonna find this balance, right? And I specifically took the picture of scales off of the slide for this because I don't want us to think about things that they have to balance equally, right? That is probably not achievable. And if we find ourselves chasing, it can add to our stress, right? I think it's important to acknowledge that not everything in our lives will or need equal weight. Some things need more of our attention, some things need less. Sometimes things deserve less of our attention, and they don't need equal balance, right? And so we have to understand that sometimes imbalance happens. Things are going to be out of whack. We have to spend more time on a certain thing, even if we don't want to get it achieved and accomplished. If we make peace with that, we actually have less stress about it because those imbalances are typically temporary and correctable. And we want to avoid falling into the, I have to be everything to everyone trap, right? I have to have balance. I have to be the all-star student at all times, but I also have a family. And everybody gets everything from me, right? That means there's nothing left for yourself. And that's not sustainable, right? There are times where we'll have to give more attention to one side and one identity, one task, and another. And we have to find ways to make sure that we're just finding time for what's important to us, right? So I often think about this as less about thinking about work-life balance and more about work-life integration. Now, I'll be honest, I took this little section here from our time management session. I talk about it in our time management session a bit more in depth, but I talk about it in time management because it relates to stress management. And if you're stressing about timetables, you're not going to be effective at time management. But it applies here, right? If we're able to look less at balance and more about how our work life integrates with one another, we can help alleviate stress. So integration is about focusing less on work time and personal time, more about best time to do something, right? It's about seeing all our daily tasks as part of a whole. It's who we are, as less of a compartmentalized, now this person gets my attention, now that person gets my attention. It's seeing ourselves more holistically. And it minimizes a sense of competing responsibilities, right? And so I encourage you to think about yourself as a holistic human with lots of identities and things you're working on, and that not everything's going to be in balance all the time. And don't try to pursue an artificial balance to your own detriment. Now, with all that said, please do make sure you strive to make time for the things that are important to you in your life, right? Don't have the conversation about things are going to be in balance between, work and family life. And that gives me, Jesse said that it's okay for me to be a workaholic and ignore my family. Not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is sometimes you may have to spend a little more time on a project, right? I can remember distinctly in graduate school where, I was raising my first child at the time. And there were times where it's like, I've got a major paper. I have to sit down and I have to focus on that. I can't go to the park today. That's okay, because go to the park tomorrow, right? So making sure I strive to find time for the things that are important to me in my life. Remember, it's okay to say no or take a break in what you're doing. And don't let the difficult task or anxiety derail you from what you're doing, right? As much as we can, we want to positively use the fight or flight, and we want to avoid the freeze, right? Because the freeze doesn't get us anywhere. Fight or flight serves a practical purpose for us. Freeze means we stop working altogether, right? And so don't let that high anxiety stop you, paralyze you into inaction, right? I have 4 things to do. And because I have 4 things to do, I do nothing, right? I have 4 things to do. So I make a to-do list and I figure out what I have to do first. I prioritize it. I do 1, I do 2, I do 3, I do 4. That's the end goal. So some things on campus that we talked about strategies and all this different stuff like that. It's important that you also know that, again, as you experience stress, there are resources on campus that can help you. It is not just you alone on an island having to find your way through this, and it's using your strategies and stuff like that. All those things are important, but using the things on campus that are here to help you mitigate stress and maintain your mental health is equally as important. And so we've talked about the Counseling and Psychological Services Office. They're located in Union West. And so I got to actually have a QR down there at the bottom that'll take you to the CAPS website. I'll talk about why here in a second. But if you want, you can check out their website. There's a Center for Accommodation and Support Services, CAS. Essentially, this is the office that helps you if you need an academic accommodation, like a note taker or something like that. They can be a resource to help you alleviate stressor in your life. The Campus Advocacy and Resource Education Office, they're located in Campbell. That's the CARE office. If you don't know about CARE, they provide a litany of services to our, excuse me, should have brought a water today. A litany of services to our campus. Essentially, they're under a grant that they are here to serve any student that has been a victim of a crime. That's the very broad definition of what they do. But they help out with a lot of different things. And so you'll see them doing a lot of different resources on our campuses. So they are one of the few confidential resources on our campus. Check out what they have to offer. There's a link or a QR code right there for their website. There's the Student Health and Wellness Center located in the East to help you with your physical health. And by maintaining your physical health, you can help make sure that you are managing your stress. You have the Dean of Students Office. I have a link there, a QR code there for their services. Dean of Students is a clearinghouse for resources and assistance on our campus. And so I strongly encourage you to check out what they have. And then there's the Office of Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution, which most folks won't immediately think of as a resource on our campus, particularly for stress management, because they think of them as the folks that get you in trouble when you're cheating on a course, right? Yes, they are the office that hears conduct cases, but they're also about conflict resolution. And so if you're having a conflict, they can help you navigate that, and that can help alleviate stress. There's also a couple of things that I want to make sure you know are resources for you. We talked about the in-person resource, going to CAPS, getting service. There's also some things that are relatively new on our campus that, again, are free to you as students that are digital. The newest one is called Timely Care. And that is a telehealth well-being service. If you sign up and create an account with telehealth or with Timely Care, you can have access to on-demand, no-charge counseling, well-being appointments and coaching, diet planning, a lot of things. And so it is a very cool resource to have. And if you have any hesitation about going in person to seek mental health and well-being resources, Timely Care is amazing. Or if you just don't have time to get somewhere in person, Timely Care is amazing. We also have something called Togetherall. That is an online peer-to-peer support network. It's kind of like social media if it was designed around mental health and well-being. It's a really cool program. I encourage you to check that out. There's a lot of resources there, and it's designed to be a peer-to-peer support area. What makes it really special is that while it's a peer-to-peer based interaction and support group kind of network, there are licensed clinicians that are also in the network that are not affiliated with UTEP. And so if someone is experiencing high levels of emotional distress, they can intervene and help out. And it's, again, anonymous. It's not related. You get an account because you're a UTEP student, but it's not directly related to us. And so that helps if you need that anonymity. And as we mentioned, we have CAPS to Go, which is a whole series of resources that you can access, those like 5-minute stress relievers, right? It's a lot of great resources there that you can take advantage of. And if you are interested in these and you want more information about them, shoot me an email and I will be sure to give you that information. If you're looking for, I don't have QRs for all of these on there. If you want access to them, let me know. I'm happy to talk with you more about those and provide those resources. Really quickly, just so the references of what we use today, I'm not going to go over these, but just show that we did have references. And then I want to finish really with any questions or thoughts that you might have, right? We've gone through a lot today, talking about first the biological processes, and then what stress is and what causes it, and then how we move from negative stress to positive stress and strategies there. But that's a lot. And so I want to open up the floor with the last few minutes that we've got I know that it's 1:02, so I'm over a little bit. That's okay. I'll stay around. And so if you have questions, feel free to come off mute or post them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer those for you. Otherwise, I appreciate you being here today, and I hope you found the session helpful.